So this whole talk is going to be in rap form. I'm just kidding. Your legs would get so tired. So I this is my first time in Park City, so I'm really excited to be here. And I first of all, did everybody have a really good day yesterday? Learn a ton of stuff? We could thank the organizers of Framework Summit for that. So very exciting. Did everybody destroy enough brain cells yesterday to make room for today's learning stuff? Maybe? So what we're going to talk about today are deploy options. So the new thing we're going to learn for starting today, and the focus, although there are more frameworks than this, are on Angular, React, and Vue. The agenda for today, what we're going to basically be talking about is we're going to do a, is that updating for you, Curtis? There we go. So we're going to start out in the agenda talking a really quick overview of deployment standards, because although we won't be going in depth about deployment standards in general, I want to show you where you can find the resources. We're more going to be talking about where you can be hosting and use the tooling for deployment. So we'll talk about command line deployments, deploying from a dashboard, containerizing for deployments. And with each of those last three, we're going to look at the different options you have readily available to you, the benefits and pitfalls of each of these strategies for deployment, and then we'll look at how to deploy an app on one of the choices you have for those different strategies. So I had a really good intro that basically covered everything in this slide. Thanks a lot. No, I'm just kidding. But this is me. I actually had somebody the other day say, as they were going through their presentation, they're like, yeah, I have my slide, my picture of myself on my second slide. I know it's really egotistical. But I think that it's very resourceful because this is the way I look everywhere online on GitHub and Twitter. You can find me at tzmanics on all of these. And most importantly, you have a good visual of Tosh Magosh, the very awkward bundle of joy in my arms right there. So everything we covered of what I do for my day job and night jobs. But the bottom one here is one that started just a few months ago. I help co-host and am the program manager for a node-focused podcast where we cover basically all of the things in Node, surrounding Node, different JavaScript and ECMAScript things. And we have an episode coming up next week on Node 10. So Always Forward with D. Shaw. It's a really great podcast to check out if you're interested in that sort of thing. So jumping right in. Deployment standards. So whenever we are looking to deploy, we want to make sure that we are doing, getting the best build times, getting the smallest package out there to be there for our user. So although we won't cover a lot of the things on how to do that as far as code splitting, server-side rendering, you can find a lot of information on the framework's sites. So first off, for Angular, they actually have a deployment section in their documentation that covers everything from just doing the simplest deployment and then going through the different options that you can have for those deployments. On GitHub, there's no section in their documentation. So I basically go to create React app every time I have questions on deployment. So a little background real quick. Working for Kendo UI, they do components for Angular, Vue, and React. So I build in all three. But I started out as a Node developer. And I was doing hosting for Node projects. So I was very familiar. I was at a platform as a service, basically. So I was really familiar with a lot of hosting, but then going into front end, every time I made a new project, I would either default to what I was used to and then realize there's so many different options out there. So that's what I wanted to basically bring to you today. So with Create React App, they talk to you in this documentation about what they have available for you that's already kind of set into stone in Create React App. This is a scaffolding library for React. But then they also give you the options of different tools that you can use to deploy your application. With Vue, there are actually two different places that I want to send you to, and all these slides will be available after from my Twitter handle. With Vue, you have the documentation section on deployment that basically talks about production deployment, and it gives you a few standards. But in the CLI documentation under deployment, they give you different options for hosting and steps you through different processes and how you do that for each of those tools. So the first thing that we want to look at now is the command line. Are there a lot of people here that work through the command line, that work on the command line a lot? Decent amount, okay. So this is basically one of the easiest or most simple ways to deploy your application. And it's basically going through the terminal command line PowerShell and pulling in your tools to just deploy it from that command line. This is always my go-to because I work in the terminal. I write in Vim, I'm always in there. So I'm gonna, for each of these sections I'm gonna list all of these. I'm basically gonna read this slide to you. But at the end, we'll touch on each of the companies because a lot of times you'll see these repeated. So for the command line options, a lot of these are bigger, more robust, like Google Firebase and Azure and Netlify, but they have CLI tools. Heroku as well. GitHub Pages is a little more simple, and Surge and Zeit do a really good job of making it very compact in the command line. So what are some of the benefits? What are some of the pitfalls? I did 3 for each of these. The ease of use for the command line is dependent on how comfortable you are with the terminal. But on most of these, you're basically typing one command. You're npm installing the CLI tools, and then you're doing one command, which we'll see in the example project. And it's fast. You don't have to go to a different website. You don't have to go through a dashboard. You don't have to find your way to it. It's like basically you're encoding. So if you use VS Code, you open up the terminal in the bottom, and you can quickly go to deploy your site. You stay in the terminal or PowerShell or wherever you are. But there are pitfalls, like you stay in the terminal if you don't like the terminal. If you don't like to be in the terminal, you find it too complicated, you just don't like it, that's a pitfall for you then. And also, you don't have the options in Vue. So you have to understand Vue, V-I-E-W, just to be clear. You have to understand what your commands are and know what the library has. So there is a bit of a learning curve to that. There are things that you have to, there will always be help options where you can reference them, but tidbit learning curve. So I want to show you the process of building this out using Zeit now and Vue.js. So the first thing that we look at, this is my website, and you'll see at the bottom that I have DevFest Atlanta was the last place I was. And say I would just want to update that real quick and do a quick deploy. So once I have the correct file open, I go down to the line of what I want to change. Pretty antiquated way of putting this information in. But so I update the information that I have inside of there and go down, and the first thing I need to do is build out the project. So I run npm run build, and it builds so fast because of the magic of recording it earlier and not relying on the internet. So the next thing that I do in here is install the Zeit CLI tool, which is npm, which is now. So I really like the Zeit now. So what you type there. So you just type now, and you see it starts building up your project, installing everything, making the build, taking a snapshot of the build, and saving that deployment image. And then once it goes, you can refresh your site, and you have updated right there. So it's pretty quick. Obviously, the build isn't as quick. We had the magic of video editing, but that gives you the gist of things. One command in, and you have a deployment. So now let's look at dashboard deploys. With the dashboard, this is basically saying you have a website that has a dashboard, things that you click, you have the graphical user interface, you have a GUI in front of you. You can see everything that you need to do. And I'll show you an example. And some of the options you have are Google Firebase, again, Heroku, Azure, Netlify. These are all pretty standard that you'll see. But the benefits and pitfalls of these, you have everything in sight. Unlike the terminal, you can see all the options that you have, right? And if you're not as tech savvy, if you have somebody that you need to have be in charge of like testing and then deployment, that's not in the code, that's not in the terminal, and this might be a little bit easier for them. And it's more universal. So if you're in the terminal and I'm in PowerShell, maybe we interact differently with how we do things. It'll be a little different. Maybe your color scheme is different than mine. Not a big deal. But on the website, you're all going to see the same website as long as they're cross-platform. But you're going to see the same thing. And so you'll be able to communicate better because it's more universal in what you're seeing and what your interactions are. But it can be really overwhelming. We did a lot of S3 for my first company. And going to that dashboard in general, they have a lot of text on there. They have a lot of options and a lot of things. And they're like, quickly learn this tutorial. Just do a 10-minute video and you can start your application. So it's a little more daunting than what you might be used to. And then the navigation on top of that can be quite confusing. So say, I need to change my DNS. Where was it that I did that the first time? So being able to navigate some of these sites can be a little daunting, a little confusing. And you know, if you're a Vim user, you have to use your mouse. It's like, who wants to do that? But joking aside, Netlify is the one that I want to talk about today. And you'll see a lot of them, Evan Yu talks about Netlify because it has, like, Vue is supported on Netlify. So obviously we're gonna do an Angular application today because you will see a lot of Vue things. So in this video, we're basically running through and we wanna first start the video. We log in using GitHub through their dashboard. And again, you're just clicking through each of these processes. You go in and sign up so that you could give authorize Netlify to go into your GitHub repositories. If you have two-factor auth, put that in there. Once you have it verified and you give it authority to go inside there, you will eventually be able to see this dashboard where you can add a new site straight from GitHub. Click on GitHub, and then you'll get your organizations you're a part of, and you can select your repositories to give them all of these accesses to those repositories. I have 140 repos, so I just went ahead and was able to search, and I just looked at the one that I did most recently to make sure I had like the most recent build of everything. So that was my resume that I built with Angular. Went ahead and I'm deploying it from master. If you have a different branch you can choose it there. For the build command, we just did ng build and put the prod flag on there. And we're gonna get everything from the distributables folder, the dist folder, because that's what it builds into. So once you have that, basically, you get sent to your dashboard where it's letting you that it's deploying it. And once it's deployed, you actually have the clickable link up top under Zealous Jepson in a second. So you can click that link and you'll see why I probably should have chosen a different project. But I was like, well, it's proving that I put an Angular application up there because I have not worked on my resume since the day that I built it. But I'm not looking for a job, so I think I'm okay. But you see that it was just a few clicks to get a project from GitHub to being hosted on Netlify. And like they have a nice, easy guide for you to go through, set up a custom domain. Once you do that, they have Let's Encrypt on there to give you some a secure protocol. And then you can go through and see the different deployment options and different things that they give you on their dashboard. So pretty simple. The next is not so simple, but I think really beneficial for the complexity that it may add to you. And these are containerized deploys. So for containerized deploys, you're basically using Docker to take your whole application in the environment and make a very stable, predictable image of your application that can be deployed and served up wherever you need it, replicated wherever you need it. You can find this on AWS, Google Cloud, Heroku, Microsoft Azure, and Zeit now. There are some really great benefits, like I was saying, with consistency, because you have a repeatable development, build, test, production environment. Like, how many times have you had it where you have tests failing somewhere but not somewhere else because your environments are different? Like, you don't have to worry about that with these Dockerized or containerized builds. And then you have, how many people have worked with the it works on my machine problem? Yeah, it's like, we've heard that all before. We have probably even said it before out of just pure anger. But now you have parity in the fact that your images run the same, no matter which server or laptop they are running on. And it's easier for continuous deployment. Continuous deployment is not something that we'll touch on today because that could be its own talk. But basically, being able to do continuous deployment with containerization or makes it a lot easier with containerization. And the strategy that we'll look at today will actually talk a little bit about continuous deployment. But there are pitfalls. This is a pretty big learning curve. You're basically learning Docker files and learning Docker commands, which, the more you use it, the more it gets more comfortable. But you're working a lot in the command line. So if you prefer that, great. If not, Docker was basically designed as a solution for hosting applications that were built on the command line. So there are some ways that you can go about that and have graphical interfaces, but they're still a bit clunky with that. So you are going to be working on the command line, and it could be complete overkill for what you need. So if you're saying like, no, I want one click, I want one command, don't do a containerization. But we're gonna look at Google Cloud and React. And since this is quite a complicated process, I actually wanted to go and talk you through something that you would be using, and that's just the documentation that Google Cloud has for containerizing these applications. So as you see here, there are 8 steps to doing this, and it's basically creating your Docker image, running the container locally to test it out, and then you basically add it to the Docker registry, create the cluster, taking advantage of Kubernetes, expose the app to the internet, scale up your application by making those replicas, and then you can, how you deploy your application next, you'll have to be doing some basic cleaning up of what you're doing. But these steps run you through exactly what to do, and like how the process you're going through goes about things. So I think this video is a little bit slower than I meant. So yeah, you'll be using Kubernetes a lot, or like using Kubernetes to handle your clusters. So you want to work with those things, and you'll also be working from the Google Cloud shell if you're going to be working through Google Cloud, which is nice because you see it in there on their system through the shell, and you'll be installing the Google Cloud SDK. So basically, you're installing kubectl and all of the gcloud CLI tools. So when you build your image, basically you can clone what you're doing and basically do a Docker build. These are one of the commands that you're going to use all the time is Docker build. And once you have that built up, you'll be able to run Docker image and see that it's created, see the information there, and have the image ID. Next, in Google Cloud, you basically want to do a Docker push and send that image up. And basically and you'll set a version to it too. Basically what's this doing is saying, send this up to the registry, we're going to be using it later. So then you have the option to do Docker run, curl it locally, see what's going on, make sure it's working. Now we start to work with Kubernetes to work with our container cluster. And here you have the commands through Google Cloud of starting up your container cluster and creating it. And then you'll be able to see the clusters that exist there. then deploy the application, basically doing kubectl run. And like some people say kube control, but I think kubectl this sounds so much more comforting. So then once you do that, you can see, you can do the get pods to see what you have for your, to run. And then you're able to expose it using kubectl expose deployment and your application or your image. So once you do that, you can see if you do get kubectl get service, you can see the IPs, you can see the ports, you can see how long it's been up there. So then you're able to scale it by making replicas of what you've already done this. So you put on more servers to handle more traffic. And it's, you know, as easy as just running these commands. So when you want to do a new version, you basically run through these again of doing the Docker build, the Docker push to put it up to registry, and then just setting the image of deployment with kubectl to that new image. But you'll want to delete what you had before, and that's what's on there. So it's a process, right? But I mean, all of that is step-by-step commands and whatnot, and really digging into your Docker files to understand what you want to have it do there. So a really quick recap of the options we have here that we talked about today, and kind of just showing you their website. We talked about Amazon S3. I've worked with this a lot, and to be completely honest, this was the one that was the most complicated, the least user-friendly in my opinion. But to make up for saying those things, there's a ton that you can do with Amazon. They have a ton of options and a ton of things that's why a lot of us, you know, tend to use it for these bigger projects. GitHub Pages is one that's like for your static pages. It does a lot of work for you without you putting a lot of effort and having to understand a lot of the code and a lot of different ways of programming. Firebase I use a ton, and Firestore as well. And this is through Google. And again, they have really great CLI tools. They have a nice dashboard, and it's a pretty good option. Heroku's been around for, how many people have used Heroku before? I feel like it's been around for so long. We've all at least done like one Heroku app. So Heroku does a lot of hosting there. You see at the bottom what their offerings are. Microsoft Azure, you have at least two people, maybe more from the Azure team here today actually. But I think if you just shout Microsoft, one of their heads will perk up. And so if you need one right in front, just talk to Asim. So Microsoft Azure is another really in-depth dashboard that gives you a lot of options and a lot of things that you can do through their dashboard and through their CLI. Netlify, we also have a representative from Netlify here who does, I told Divya I was going to call her out, so she's back there. So these are all the people that you can bother. Surge is one that I actually just found recently. It's another really quick command in the CLI, but it's an open source project, very interesting. I actually just started messing around with it, and it's Surge SH. It's all in the shell. It's pretty nice. And Zeit is a company that I know React is working a lot with Zeit as well. And they have a lot of tools that you can use as far as deploying from the command line, but also having a dashboard readily available to you to monitor things. And yeah, they have Zeit now, and that just sounds cool. So those are all the options. But I still have like 2 minutes left. So I wanted to have a really quick PSA. And mind you, these are all my own opinions, and I won't talk to you about your brain on drugs, so don't worry about that. This is actually a PPSA, a parental public service announcement. I don't know if you may or may not have noticed, I did not give this talk alone. The co-presenter has not come into the world yet, but I am pregnant. And amazingly, I still remembered how to give technical talks in front of people. And I still remember how to quit Vim, so I'm still a valuable member of my team. And I'm telling you that as much as I had to repeatedly tell myself that, because I was very nervous about coming out as pregnant to my team. I was convinced that I could just tell them this was what happens when you're on the keto diet, but I realized that might not work. But in doing so, I realized that my company actually offered, I realized my team was extremely supportive, and I realized that we offer this parental leave at Progress. So this means that you give paid time off to all parents, partners, in natural, adoptive, and fostering situations. So instead of this implicit bias that may happen when I walk into a room and you see, a woman in her 30s, and you may think is she gonna have to take time off to start a family? With this kind of policy, with the parental leave policy, it's kind of giving us a more even playing ground. So there's no particular age or gender. They have to worry about all of us. So I always think that that's a really great way to give us, kind of an even keel everywhere. Because really, this is where we all started, right? Becoming part of a family. Which brings us here today. I think that we all are kind of brought together in a common thing that we, creating technology. We come together as a family, and just like a family, we may not always agree, we may not always like each other. There's always that one person that wants to talk about jQuery. But like a family, we all want all of our family members to be treated with care and with respect. So I'm happy to be here with you today, my Framework Summit family, to learn with and from you. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.